Here's the Amish secret to growing 1 year's worth of food, even in a small space. Enrich soil with natural manure and compost. A fertile soil is the foundation of big yields. The Amish avoid chemical fertilizers, instead using animal manure as a rich, all-purpose soil amendment. Manure, often composted with straw and scraps, returns nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and trace minerals to the earth, creating black gold for their gardens. This organic approach builds healthy soil structure and microbes, which in turn grow healthier, more productive plants. By continually adding compost and manure, even a small plot soil stays fertile enough to support a year's worth of crops. Practice strict crop rotation. Rotating crops each season is an Amish must-do for long-term productivity. They never grow the same vegetable in the same spot year after year. Instead, heavy feeders like corn or tomatoes move to a new bed, and a different crop takes their place. This prevents nutrient depletion and breaks pest disease cycles, since many pests are crop-specific and won't find their host plant in the new spot. On Amish farms, careful rotation and fallowing have even brought worn-out fields back to life. In a small garden, you can rotate plant families, like fallow tomatoes with beans or cabbages with carrots, to keep the soil balanced and pest pressures low, ensuring high yields each year. Succession planting for continuous harvests. Rather than planting once and being done, Amish gardeners sow in waves to get multiple harvests from the same space. For example, they might plant an early crop of sweet corn, then a second corn planting in June for a fall harvest. By staggering planting dates a few weeks apart, you harvest one crop while the next is coming in. Once an early crop is finished, they immediately replant that bed with a new crop. This method of planting at intervals can yield 2 or even 3 rounds of vegetables from one plot in a single season. The result is a steady supply of fresh produce, spring greens, summer fruits, fall storage crops, all from a limited area. In your small space, practice succession planting, like follow spring lettuce with summer beans, then a late spinach crop. To mimic this continuous output, use intercropping to maximize space. Amish gardeners are experts at intercropping, growing compatible crops together, so no space is idle. A classic trick is pairing a slow-growing crop with a quick one in the same bed. For instance, plant cabbage or broccoli, slower to mature, and sow radishes or lettuce around them. The quick crop will be harvested by the time the slow one needs the room. One example, an Amish gardener might sow radishes or spinach in the spaces between young squash or melon plants. The fast radishes are pulled in 30 days, just as the squash vines begin to sprawl. Another example is planting watermelon seedlings among a cabbage patch. The cabbages are harvested before the watermelon vines spread. By overlapping crop timings this way, they fill every inch of soil with food. In a small garden, interplanting tall with short, early with late ensures you get the most produce per square foot. Companion planting for natural pest control. Generations of Amish growers have learned which plants grow better together. They often plant certain flowers and herbs alongside vegetables to repel pests and boost growth. For example, marigolds are interplanted next to vegetable rows because their scent helps deter harmful insects that might attack crops. Similarly, herbs like basil may be grown with tomatoes to improve flavor and discourage bugs. This intentional companion planting creates a healthier, balanced garden ecosystem that doesn't require chemical pesticides. Plants in the right combinations can protect each other. One provides shade or ground cover, another repels pests, another fixes nitrogen in the soil. The Amish rely on these old-fashioned pairings, such as planting beans with corn or flowers like nasturtium and marigold around the garden, to keep their crops safe and yields high, even in small plots. Grow vertically to save space. Grow up, not out, is a key small space strategy, and Amish gardeners use it to great effect. Instead of letting vines sprawl all over the ground, they train plants to climb. Beans, peas, cucumbers, and even squash are guided up trellises, fences, or poles. By using vertical trellising, you can save around 75% of the ground space that those crops would normally sprawl over. In Amish gardens, it's common to see pole beans twining up corn stalks or cucumbers climbing a fence line. They build sturdy arbors and A-frame trellises from wood, wire, or whatever is handy, allowing them to pack more plants into a small area. Vertical gardening not only squeezes more production into a tiny space, but also can improve yields, more airflow and sun exposure for the plants, and makes harvesting easier. Even if your yard is just a patio or narrow strip, think vertically. Grow climbing beans up a teepee, tomatoes on stakes, or use hanging planters to maximize your food output. Optimize plant spacing, neither too far nor too close. To get the most from limited land, the Amish carefully measure their plant spacing. Every inch of soil is precious, so they don't waste space with overly wide gaps. By planting on a tight grid or in well-planned rows, they fit more plants in. However, they also avoid crowding plants too closely, which can invite disease and reduce yields. The goal is optimal spacing. Enough room for each plant's roots and leaves to develop, but not so much that weeds take over open ground. In humid climates, Amish growers give a bit more breathing room to prevent mildew. Airflow is important, whereas in drier areas, they might plant a bit tighter. This precise spacing means healthier plants with access to sufficient light, nutrients, and moisture, ultimately producing more food per area. In your garden, follow their lead. Use a measuring stick when sowing seeds or setting transplants. For example, thin your carrots and beets to the recommended distance so each can reach full size, and don't waste space between rows. You can plant in a staggered or hexagonal pattern to use space efficiently. Choose high-yield, hardy crop varieties. Another Amish secret is focusing on plant varieties that reliably produce a lot of food. They favor time-tested heirlooms known for abundance and storability. For instance, many Amish grow Amish paste tomatoes, a variety prized for heavy yields of thick-fleshed tomatoes ideal for sauce and canning. They also stick to staple crops that are proven performers in their region, such as tomatoes, potatoes, corn, beans, cabbages, etc., often planting both a main crop and a second round as insurance. While it's fun to try unusual plants, Amish gardeners devote most of their space to workhorse varieties that feed the family. One strategy is the 80-20 rule, about 80% productive, staple varieties, and 20% experimental or specialty crops. This ensures the bulk of the garden is geared toward producing serious calories and nutrition. In a small space, you should prioritize seeds known for high output. Think prolific bush beans, cherry tomatoes, which fruit heavily, subtle as old kale or chard, cut and come again greens, zucchini, etc. By choosing proven high-yield varieties, often heirlooms adapted to local conditions, you'll harvest far more food from the same garden than if you grow finicky, low-yield plants. Prioritize calorie-rich staples, potatoes, corn, beans, etc. Growing a year's worth of food means focusing on staple crops that provide substantial calories and nutrition. The Amish dedicate a good portion of their gardens and fields to the heavy hitters: potatoes, corn, beans, winter squash, and grains. These crops are high in carbohydrates or protein and can be stored for many months, forming the core of their diet. For example, a few rows of potatoes can yield hundreds of pounds of tubers, which, if stored properly, can last all winter. Dry beans, like kidney, navy, or soup beans, are grown on the vine or bush and left to mature and dry. They provide protein and keep for years. Corn is dual-purpose sweet corn for fresh eating and denter flint corn for grinding into flour or feeding livestock. By growing lots of calorie-dense foods, the Amish ensure their pantry has enough energy or calories to sustain the family for the year. In a small space homestead, you too should allocate space to a few staple crops. Even a small 10 by 10 plot can produce a surprisingly large harvest of, say, potatoes or sweet potatoes in barrels or vertical towers of pole beans. Staples give you the most food value for the space and effort, which is crucial for self-sufficiency. Use the Three Sisters planting method. The Three Sisters is an age-old companion planting technique embraced by many traditional farmers, including some Amish, to maximize yield in a small area. The trio consists of corn, beans, and squash grown together in a complementary way. Corn stalks provide a natural trellis for pole beans to climb. Beans fix nitrogen in the soil to fertilize the corn, and squash vines spread out as a living mulch, suppressing weeds and conserving moisture with their large leaves. All three crops share the same plot harmoniously and produce a diverse harvest of grain, protein, and vitamins. Amish growers often dedicate patches of their garden to a Three Sisters mound system. Mounds are rows where several corn seeds, a few bean seeds, and a squash or pumpkin are planted together. This brilliantly simple polyculture yields a lot of food from one area, just as it sustained Native American communities for generations. If you have a small sunny patch, try the Three Sisters method. Plant corn in clusters, add beans once the corn is a foot tall, and plant squash around the edges. You'll get tall corn, twining bean vines, and creeping squash all in one bed, packing productivity into tight quarters. Grow food in all three growing seasons. One secret to output is not limiting gardening to summer. The Amish take advantage of spring, summer, and fall to grow crops, effectively extending the harvest season. They'll sow frost-tolerant plants like oats, peas, or lettuce in early spring or April, as soon as the ground can be worked. Come summer, heat-loving crops fill the fields. As summer wanes, they plant cool season veggies again for a fall harvest. For example, they might plant a second round of late corn or plant turnips and hardy greens in late summer for autumn picking. By using the shoulder seasons, they squeeze in additional harvests. Even in winter, the Amish often have something growing slowly, perhaps spinach or kale in a cold frame, or overwintering garlic and wheat in the fields. Many communities report harvesting a first crop of spinach or greens as early as late February or March from overwintered plantings. The lesson: use your whole growing season. In a small garden, plant early crops like radishes, peas, broccoli. For spring, main crops for summer, and then don't forget to plant fall crops like carrots, cabbage, mustard greens in late summer. With planting, you can get 2 to 3 rounds of harvesting in a year, greatly increasing total food production. Use season extension techniques such as cold frames or low tunnels. The Amish are adept at extending their growing season beyond the limits of weather. One common tool is the cold frame, essentially a bottomless wooden box with an old window or clear lid on top placed over garden beds. This acts as a mini greenhouse, protecting seedlings from late frost and allowing planting weeks earlier than open ground. Amish gardeners also build simple low tunnels or hoop houses using PVC or wire hoops covered with row cover fabric or plastic to shield crops from cold. These low-cost structures can keep plants growing, albeit slowly, through the coldest months. For example, spinach, kale, and cilantro might be planted in fall and, under a low tunnel, survive winter to produce in very early spring. In some Amish greenhouses, wood stove heat is used to start seedlings in late winter. They even use techniques like putting jugs of hot water or thermal mass, like rocks, in greenhouses to retain heat overnight. By protecting crops from frost, they effectively gain extra months of production. Small space gardeners can replicate this by using cold frames. You can build one from an old window or row covers over hoops to keep frost off. Even an unheated greenhouse or a simple polytunnel can make a huge difference, enabling you to harvest vegetables in November or start planting in February, thereby growing more food over a year. Incorporate perennial food plants, such as fruits and more. Annual vegetables are great, but Amish homesteaders know that perennials, plants that come back year after year, are the gift that keeps on giving. They plant fruit trees like apples, peaches, and pears, and berry bushes, such as strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries, which, once mature, produce food every year with relatively little work. A single dwarf apple tree, for instance, can yield bushels of apples each fall for decades. The Amish often store apples through winter or press them into cider for year-round use. Rhubarb patches, asparagus beds, and perennial herbs like thyme or mint are also common in their gardens. Plant once and enjoy for many seasons. By dedicating some space to these perennial crops, they secure a recurring food supply that complements the annual garden. Even in a small yard, you can plant a few perennial producers. Perhaps a couple of blueberry bushes along a fence, a hardy grapevine on an arbor, or a corner with asparagus that will produce every spring. Perennials often have deep roots and are resilient, yielding reliably. The Amish also favor varieties known as storage fruits or vegetables. For example, storage apples that keep for months, or winter squash with hard rinds that can sit until the next harvest. Emulate this by picking long-keeping fruit varieties, many heirloom apples for example, and including them in your self-sufficiency garden. These plants ensure that some food is always available each year, even if annual crops have a bad season. Integrate livestock into the garden system. Amish homesteads blur the line between garden and barnyard. Their animals and crops support each other. Even on a small scale, raising a few backyard livestock can greatly boost food production. For example, chickens are often kept not only for eggs and meat, but also for their manure and pest control abilities. Amish gardeners might tractor chickens through spent garden rows. The chickens scratch up the soil, eat insects and weeds, and fertilize with manure as they go. Their manure is then turned into the soil to enrich it for the next planting. Rabbits or goats can be kept in or near the garden. Their droppings make excellent fertilizer too. If space permits, some Amish also use sheep or cows rotationally grazing cover crops, which later become fertilizer. The key is integration. Livestock consume garden scraps and produce manure, while the garden produces excess or specific crops to feed livestock, like field corn, hay, or even surplus veggies. Even bees, technically livestock, are integrated, placed near orchards and gardens to pollinate crops. More on bees next. In a suburban setting, you might keep a small chicken coop that can be periodically moved onto garden beds in the off-season, or simply add composted chicken/rabbit manure to your soil. Not only do you get eggs or meat, but your garden soil becomes incredibly rich. The Amish prove that plants and animals together create a closed-loop system, each benefiting the other. a secret to productivity that you can apply on a micro homestead scale. Keep beehives for pollination and honey. Many Amish farms include a few beehives tucked in a corner of the garden. Bees are nature's pollinators. Having beehives nearby ensures that fruit tree blossoms, berry flowers, and vegetables like cucumbers and squash get thoroughly pollinated for maximum yield. An Amish garden with plenty of bee activity will set more fruit, for instance, more apples per tree and fuller pumpkin patches. Beyond pollination, the hives provide honey, a valuable food and natural sweetener that the Amish use in place of refined sugar at times. Honey, of course, stores indefinitely, making it a perfect addition to a year's food supply. Beeswax from the hives is also useful for making candles, salves, or for trade. In a small space homestead, 1 or 2 beehives can significantly increase your garden's productivity. For example, an urban beekeeper will find their vegetable garden suddenly far more prolific thanks to the resident pollinators. Plus, you gain jars of honey each season that can be used or bartered. The Amish recognize that fostering pollinators is crucial to abundant harvests. It's a lesson worth considering if you aim to be self-sufficient. Plant bee-friendly flowers, such as clover, sunflowers, or wildflowers, around your garden, and if possible, try beekeeping on a small scale. Healthy bees will help ensure you indeed grow that full year's worth of food by fertilizing your crops the natural way. Use every inch of space creatively. One hallmark of Amish gardening is efficiency. No space is left unused. Even if their homestead is large, they treat land as a precious resource from which they must extract a livelihood. In a small yard or garden, this mindset is even more critical. You'll see Amish gardens utilizing borders and odd corners. Beans or grapes might climb up the side of a shed. Herbs could fill a narrow strip along the walkway, and lettuce or radishes might be tucked between rows of larger plants. They often plant in intensive beds rather than long single rows, packing vegetable plants in tighter with proper spacing to maximize yields. If there's a fence, it can support peas or espaliered fruit trees. If there's a sunny wall, it might host trellised cucumbers or be backed with reflective material to start seedlings early. Some Amish even use container gardening for certain herbs or to start seedlings. Wooden boxes or large pots are filled with rich soil and placed in sunny spots. The idea is to not let any growing opportunity go to waste. You can apply this by surveying your own space. Do you have a balcony that could hold a vertical strawberry tower? A driveway edge that could accommodate some pots of tomatoes? Perhaps a flat roof that could support a few shallow planters for salad greens? Use succession planting and intercropping, as mentioned in points number 3 and 4, so that as soon as one crop is done, another is ready to fill in, leaving soil never idle. The Amish secret here is diligence in planning and planting so that every bit of garden real estate works towards feeding the family. Control weeds naturally, mulch, and mussel. Amish gardeners maintain incredibly tidy, weed-free plots, which helps their crops thrive. They achieve this through a combination of mulching and plain old-fashioned weeding by hand or hoe. It starts with preparation. If breaking new ground, they might even use black plastic sheeting over rows to kill grass and weeds, a trick some Amish farmers use in large gardens. During the growing season, they lay down organic mulches like straw, leaves, or grass clippings around plants to smother weeds and retain moisture. In fact, using straw or even old hay as mulch is common in Amish communities. This blocks sunlight from reaching weed seeds. Weeds that do appear are quickly removed. Many Amish weed early in the morning, hoeing between rows while weeds are tender. This consistent attention means weeds never get out of hand or steal nutrients from crops. In small spaces, weeds can quickly overwhelm, so the secret is vital. Stay on top of weeding. You can also plant densely or use cover crops to shade out potential weeds. For example, one Amish gardener planted lettuce all around her pepper plants, leaving no bare soil for weeds. For mulching, consider materials like straw, which the Amish have in abundance from farming, or even layers of newspaper cardboard under a thin layer of compost. By controlling weeds without chemicals, just proactive mulching and cultivation, your crops will have less competition and you'll harvest more food from your plot. Harvest rainwater and use efficient irrigation. Water is life for a garden, and the Amish often employ ingenious off-grid methods to ensure their crops get enough moisture. One common practice is rainwater harvesting. Amish farms and greenhouses may have gutters along roofs directing rain into large barrels or cisterns. This stored rainwater is pure and free, and it can be gravity-fed to the garden. In one example, an Amish greenhouse had a barrel-fed overhead pipe system with small holes, effectively creating a gentle, rain-like irrigation for seedlings. In the vegetable garden, many Amish prefer drip irrigation or soak hoses over wasteful sprinklers. Drip lines deliver water directly to the base of each plant, which uses far less water and encourages deeper roots. It also keeps the leaves dry, reducing fungal diseases. Even without modern pumps, they might set a barrel higher than the garden and let gravity push water through drip hoses laid among the rows. This efficient watering means they can maintain a large garden even with limited water. For a small space grower, the takeaway is to capture and conserve water. Set up a rain barrel under your gutter downspout. One good rain can fill a 50-plus gallon barrel, which can water your veggies for weeks. Use watering methods that target the roots, drip lines, soaker hoses, or even just careful hand watering with a can to avoid evaporation losses. Mulching, as mentioned in point number 17, also keeps soil moisture from evaporating. With these methods, you ensure your crops get the water they need without a huge water bill, and you can keep them alive through dry spells. Critical when you rely on that food. Compost everything, including kitchen and garden waste. The Amish turn waste into wealth for their soil through composting. Vegetable peels, apple cores, eggshells, coffee grounds, all kitchen scraps that are biodegradable. Get added to compost heaps along with garden weeds, animal bedding, and manure. Over time, this breaks down into rich, dark compost that they return to the fields and garden beds. Nothing organic is wasted. Even fallen leaves in autumn are seen as a resource and piled up to rot into leaf mold. This constant composting replenishes nutrients and organic matter in the soil, meaning each year's garden can be just as bountiful as the last. Compost improves soil structure, helps retain water, and feeds the myriad soil organisms that keep plants healthy. Amish gardeners often have multiple compost piles going, one actively being added to, and others cooking until ready to spread. In a small space, you can do this on a smaller scale by maintaining a compost bin or even a simple pile in a corner of your yard. Layering green materials like fresh grass clippings and vegetable scraps with brown materials like dry leaves, cardboard, and straw allows nature to do the work. Over a few months, or faster if you turn it frequently, you'll get homemade fertilizer for free. By continually cycling nutrients back into your soil via compost, you can keep growing ample food year after year without depleting the ground. Make homemade fertilizer teas and tonics. Beyond standard compost, Amish growers often whip up their own natural fertilizers and soil boosters from farm resources. One such secret is manure tea, a time-honored concoction made by steeping aged manure in water. Imagine a big burlap bag of well-rotted cow or horse manure dunked in a barrel of water like a giant tea bag, left to sit for a week. The result is a nutrient-packed liquid feed that can be diluted and watered onto plants for an instant growth boost. It's rich in nitrogen and beneficial microbes, acting like an organic miracle-grow. The Amish might use manure tea on heavy-feeding plants like corn or pumpkins during critical growth phases. Similarly, they add simple kitchen ingredients to the soil to boost fertility naturally. Crushed eggshells are worked into tomato beds to add calcium, which prevents blossom end rot. Used coffee grounds, rich in nitrogen, are sprinkled around acid-loving plants or added to compost. Wood ash from the stove is saved to provide potassium and raise soil pH, with Amish farmers often sprinkling it over garden plots in winter. These homemade soil amendments cost nothing but can significantly improve plant health. For the self-sufficient gardener, learning to brew compost or manure teas and save nutrient-rich waste is a great way to boost your harvest without store-bought fertilizer. Just be sure that manure tea is made from well-aged manure to avoid burning plants or transmitting pathogens, and apply it sparingly but consistently for the best results. For more contents like this, click here to subscribe.